Okay.
All right, go ahead, Ebony. Thank you.
Well, thanks. Hi, my name is Ebony Russell. As Jennifer mentioned, I'm the asset manager specializing in community development block grants and housing solutions programs for the Division of Housing. After executing your grant or loan agreement, I will be your point of contact for all CDBG projects in the state of Colorado. This webinar is kind of an entry-level overview for the application process and the accompanying federal requirements. And although CDBG does fund public facility projects, we will only address requirements for housing projects in this webinar. So today we're going to talk about the forms and the laws and all of that. So just remember to mute yourself if you're going to snore because it can get pretty dry. This webinar is going to last about an hour and a half. And like I said, or like Jennifer mentioned, she's going to monitor the chats for any questions and I can take them at any time. So with that, I'm just gonna get started. 1 second. Share my screen. Okay, so this is the overview, part 1, application process and cross-cutting requirements. A little bit about CDBG's history. It's a flexible program that provides communities with funding to address a wide range of community development needs. This program is one of the longest continuously run programs HUD offers, and it gives annual grants on a formula basis to 1,200 units of general local government insular areas and states. So HUD provides funds to local governments for increased housing stock, improved infrastructure and public facilities, and improved economic opportunities. The federal law requires that these grants primarily benefit persons with low to moderate income. So 51% of all beneficiaries of CDBG projects must have incomes at 80% AMI or below. So when we say cross-cutting requirements, we are talking about any entity that receives CDBG funds must demonstrate compliance with CDBG's federal requirements. And so that's, cross-cutting requirements and federal requirements are interchangeable.
Ebony, will you pause just for a brief moment? I received a message saying that there's nothing on the screen other than Ebony's picture. Is that happening for others? Can someone type in the... Okay, so Melissa says she can see the presentation. Others?
Mary Bell, you might need to change your layout. If you click on the 3 dots on the bottom right corner and click change layout, you might want to switch it to either spotlight or sidebar. You're probably on tiled right now.
You can also pin Ebony to your screen. So if you would like to just hover over Ebony's picture and you should be able to pin it to the screen. Sorry, Ebony, keep going. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So units of local government, where were we? Eligible entities. So who can receive CDBG funding? Units of general local governments or UGLUGs in non-entitlement areas can receive this funding. And then that funding is granted or loaned, it's usually granted, to quasi-governmental agencies like housing authorities and other local agencies, also private developers. When cities or counties contract with PHAs and local agencies, a subrecipient agreement is required. And we'll go into more detail on what that is in a moment. The eligible activities for housing, what the Division of Housing will generally fund is acquisition, rehabilitation, public facility fees, and programs like the Single Family Owner Occupied Program or the Down Payment Assistance Program. Sometimes we do fund activities to help eliminate slum and blight, like demolition, but that's not common. The application schedule for all projects, including CDBG, looks like this. If you are requesting rental, acquisition, rehabilitation, new construction, those things, we accept those on the 1st of every month. For the Single Family Owner Occupied Program, that is July 1st of every year. And the Down Payment Assistance Program, which just passed, which is December 1st of every year. So the process, the application process is that UGLUGS will apply for the funding. So states receiving funding must contract with UGLUGS only, and therefore cities and counties are the only people who can apply. So we urge you, if you're planning to apply, to sync up with the city or county in your area and help you to apply for the funding, and contact your development specialist in your area for that. Prior to submitting an application, oh, I just said that. Projects are reviewed again by the state housing board. So once you submit your application to the Division of Housing, it's reviewed by your development specialist, and then again by the State Housing Board. And those meetings are held once a month where applicants are required to present their project. After that, a recommendation will be made to the executive director, who makes the final determination based on your information provided to the State Housing Board.
Ebony, I'm going to interrupt you again. Sorry.
Yeah.
I am getting feedback that it's hard to see the PowerPoint.
No.
If you could go to the slideshow tab and click set up slideshow. And then show type. Let's see.
So it's slideshow.
Select browsed by an individual. Yeah.
I don't see any changes. Is everybody able to see it better? I'm not seeing any changes on the side.
Ebony, now just hit from current slide and then it'll put you into presenter mode.
Hit my current slide?
No, up at the top, it says from current slide. So just hit
okay. Is that better, everybody? Sorry about that. Yeah. Okay. So these are the development specialists, and they're assigned to specific regions. The website above will help you determine who is the development specialist for your area. So let's go ahead and have a look at the application itself. I've highlighted, so this is the application in its current form. We will be moving to a portal where you can submit your application called Neighborly, but it's going to look similar to this. The questions won't change. And so I've highlighted questions that will determine whether or not you're eligible for CDBG funding. So the organization, of course, we can only contract with UGLUGS, and so the city or county that you will be developing your project will have to apply for the project. You, the grantee, your name goes here. The type of organization sometimes is key because CDBOs, or community-based development organizations, can do more things with CDBG than nonprofits. And so it's important that you let us know what type of organization you are. The type of project will inform us on whether we're able to use CDBG funding. Like, we don't use CDBG funding for group homes or shelters. And the type of activity will inform us as well. CDBG funding can't be used for new construction. your site control status. This will help us to determine whether you're eligible if you have the proper documentation for site control in time. And it affects things like Uniform Relocation Act and your environmental review. And we'll go over the documentation necessary for those in detail a bit later. Population served, again, we can only serve a project that benefits 51% of low-income participants with incomes at 80% or below AMI. Your timeline, if you're looking to get your project funded quickly, some of these federal requirements take time to show compliance, and so that will also tell us if we're able to use CDBG funding. So today we'll talk about in detail one-for-one replacement, URA. Davis-Bacon we'll talk about next time because that is after contract execution. Environmental review we'll talk about today. And fair housing. We'll also talk about your 504 compliance, and I didn't highlight that, yeah. So after you've completed, everyone will sign here certifying that everything is true to the best of their knowledge. Here are the attachments that are required to be turned in with the application. Basically, this states that you submit to a full review when you submit your application, and you'll allow us to look at your records, books, papers, and documents, that you will comply with the requirements of any funding source that you receive, but we're talking about CDBG today, so CDBG, and that you will provide citizens the opportunity to participate in the development of the project. And that's where your attachment C comes in. Your attachment C is basically stating that you provided legal notice in a local newspaper that you will be funding a project in that area, and that you've offered citizens a chance to have input in that. There's a form to help you determine what's necessary to do that, and so you'll turn in this form for public hearing, and you'll turn it in with your proof of publication of whichever local newspaper that you used. Attachment D is your relocation and anti-displacement form. And we're going to go over the requirements for this in detail, but basically it says that you've signed and you've made sure that you have voluntary acquisition, and you've made sure that you've considered the displacement of any residents in the project that you are developing, and that you have worked to minimize that displacement. This is an example of voluntary acquisition, and we're going to go over that in full detail, but this is a form that you can use to show proof that you have voluntarily acquired any unit or any property or land that you will use for CDBG funding. So CDBG does require that all property acquisition be voluntary. Davis-Bacon, we're going to talk about that a lot more in the next webinar, but this form states that either Davis-Bacon does not apply for the following reasons, or that it does apply. And I can tell you that Davis-Bacon applies to rehabilitation units that have more than 8 CDBG funded units in them. And for most other things with CDBG funding, you can say that Davis-Bacon doesn't apply. There's an immigration policy here. All DOH funded projects have to have an affidavit of legal residency for all participants in the project. So all residents must have this form in the file, and this is a form stating that you will make sure that that's there. If you ever have any questions about what your insurance requirements are for your funded projects, this is a list of what's required. And you signing this form says that you will obtain all of these insurances for the project. An intergovernment agreement or intergovernmental agreement is applied to projects or programs like down payment assistance and single family owner occupied programs, because those programs span different counties. And so this intergovernmental agreement says that the applicant or the lead party, so say the county is Prowers County and they have a DPA program, but they also will assist people in Otero County or other counties. This states that they will be the lead agencies and that they have these certain responsibilities, and what the responsibilities of all the counties are for this project or program. And then everybody signs saying that they agree to that. W-9 for tax and funding purposes. And your attachment K. Your attachment K states that one person will be the responsible administrator for this project or the project that you are applying for, and that they will be the person who signs all of the reporting documents, all of the payment requests, and all of the project closeout information. And we require that that be backed up by a policy or board resolutions, just so that we know that there is one person who is the point of contact for the project. And here you have your handy dandy checklist. So if you're looking at your project, you can look and see what type of project that you're applying for and what information is required. For CDBG, there are additional attachments which we can go over now. The first attachment is the subrecipient agreement. I mentioned the subrecipient agreement a little earlier, and this is the agreement where local agencies, housing authorities, contracting with units of local government like cities or counties will sign to ensure that their project is designated for the right responsibilities, the terms of agreement. The main question that I get here is this clause 4 right here. And clause 4 states that the city is responsible for reporting, because that's who we contract with. And so they will be submitting all the payment requests. They will be turning in all of the quarterly reports and the closeout documents and things like that. But there's a little, there's a sentence here that says within X number of days of receiving payment from DOH, the local government shall provide funds to the local organization. And I get questions from the local organization asking me to supply that number of days, and that's not really what I can do. That's a part of your subrecipient agreement. So this is saying DOH will pay the city or the county, and then you and the city, the agency and the city will agree on the number of days it will take for the city to pay them. And so that's a part of the subrecipient agreement, and something that you work out with them. And then you sign and date there and say that you agree to that. Attachment P is your citizen participation plan. And so this is a lot like attachment C. If you've done attachment C, you've done attachment P. It says that you will, prior to submitting your application, and this is 2 weeks prior to submitting your application to us, that you will have had a formal public hearing for your project, that it will have been published in the newspaper 5 days prior to the hearing, and that you will be providing information about how the CDBG funds will be used, that you will be providing technical assistance, and that you have waited for written comments from the citizens in your areas and that you've responded to them. And for programs like down payment assistance and single family owner occupied programs, that you will have done this for each county directly participating in the project. Attachment Q is stating that you have a community development plan, that your project has identified needs in this area where you will be developing the project, and that you have activities that will be sustained for a year that will address those needs. And if you look here, you can see that, you know, some of those needs are public facilities, economic development, the unemployment rate, whatever you choose here, you would put on this side and say, this is what we are addressing, and this is how our development will address those needs. And it will do that for at least 1 year. And the last attachment that you'll need to turn in for CDBG is attachment R. And attachment R just states that excessive force will not be used by law enforcement agencies within the jurisdiction where you're funded for any individuals engaged in nonviolent civil rights demonstrations. And so you'll have to work with the county will have to state that they will not be doing this. So that is your application and all of the attachments. There are additional attachments. I'm not done yet. So one is the Affirmative Fair Housing Marketing Plan. And the purpose of this plan is to help applicants offer equal housing opportunities regardless of race, color, national origin, religion, sex, and familiar status or disability. This applies to rental acquisition and rehabilitation projects and does not apply to down payment assistance and single family owner occupied programs. And I'm just going to pull up that form so we can have a look at it. And I've just highlighted some things here. So this form really is a document that states that you will be reaching out to underserved communities. And this form basically documents that when we are monitored by HUD and they're looking to see the outcomes and the successes of the project, this is a major, this documentation is telling to see how your project actually looked at it. And so sometimes when I'm looking at these forms, I feel like people are just checking boxes, but this form really is a tool for you to use to make sure that your program actually benefits the least likely to apply in the area where you're funded. So you're going to be looking at your demographics and the market area and to determine who's least likely to apply, identify that population, and then specifically market to them. The residency preference area, that's basically saying that you will you will basically admit people first who reside or work in that area. Any residency preference that you select must be in accordance with the non-discrimination and equal opportunity requirements contained in 24 CFR 501.5A. So if you're going to claim a residency preference, you should look that guidance up and make sure that you don't run afoul of that. Fair housing posters must be posted in the rental office. Sometimes people miss that. And equal opportunity housing logos must be on documentation and visible in the rental office where people are applying. So your evaluation of market activities should be done initially, and I would say once a year you should look at your rent rolls and everything to determine whether the people you identified as least likely to apply are actually filling units in the housing project that you have developed. Staff training, there is no requirement for intervals of staff training, but I would say that it should be done once a year as well. So you should be training your staff, written or orally, and assessing their skills on marketing to individuals to make sure that they're complying with the Fair Housing Act. And there are some tools here to help you determine that. So this is your demographics for least likely to apply residents. So you can use your census tract, your housing marketing area, and to determine who's living there, and the people who are least likely to apply. That's how you determine who you're marketing to. You determine the preference area by using this worksheet here. And again, the residency preference area must be in compliance with basically the general demographics of the area. So if the people that you're marketing to, maybe teachers or something like that, they must match the demographics of the area that you're in, of the area that you're applying for housing for. And excuse me, I'm kind of rambling right now, but if you look at this form, you can just look and see, does my residency preference area match the percentages of residents for the Hispanic or Latino community? And if they do, then you know that you can use that as a preference point. So your marketing activities, you can document that here, saying how you market it to individuals. And then again, if you notice that you're not attracting the preferred or the least likely to apply residents, then you can go back and see how you marketed before and how you'd like to change that. Up here is the evaluation of that. Sorry if I'm making anybody sick with my scrolling. So you can evaluate how that marketing worked for you and how it didn't work. So that is the affirmative fair housing marketing plan. Does anybody have any questions about that? I guess I'll check for questions. I know Jennifer will be letting me know if there are.
No questions so far, but if there are, please be sure to enter them in the chat feature or raise your hand.
Okay. Next, we're going to talk about the 504 self-evaluation. The purpose of this evaluation is to determine the current level of accessibilities for persons with disability to programs and activities, and to provide an educational basis for further change within the department, so the department will be in full compliance with Section 504. And just a couple of information points for Section 504. We're asking that you develop policies that increase participation for individuals with disabilities. And so the one thing here that I think is the most helpful is if you reach out to organizations that represent handicapped individuals and ask them to maybe take a tour of your building, take a tour of your office, and make sure that it's accessible in the eyes of a person with a disability. I think that's the most beneficial approach for this, and it'll help you to determine if there are any changes that you need to make. A lot of people don't even mark if they have done this, and so we're asking that you pay special attention to this and make the appropriate changes if to your office, if it's just like the way your office is situated, if it creates a barrier to bathrooms and things like that. Your local independent centers can help you hone in on what necessary changes you need to make. And all contractors and subcontractors should be made aware of Section 504 and any issues that could help them fully participate in the program. We require that you train your staff, so make sure you're doing that and documenting that. So make sure that you are doing this initially and continuing steps to notify participants, beneficiaries, and applicants. So once you begin the program with your initial application and also throughout the life of the project. And one thing to pay special attention to is emergency evacuation, just making sure that you have a plan for that in place and that you've documented that, and that you can describe that here. Anything that you write down, we are asking that you turn in documentation of any written policies or anything that you've developed so that we can have a look at that as well. So that's your 504. So now that we've covered everything that you need to turn in for application, once your application is submitted, you'll be talking to your developer about your federal requirements. And one of them, the major federal requirements, is environmental review. Your environmental review comes from the National Environmental Policy Act, which requires federal agencies to assess the environment's effects or assess the environmental effects of their proposed actions prior to making any decisions. The environmental review is the enforcement mechanism of the NEPA policy. And it is just saying it's the process of reviewing the impacts to determine whether your project complies with NEPA. And so the related laws that the environmental review ensures you're in compliance with are here. A big one is the National Historic Preservation Act, the Floodplain Management, Wild and Scenic Rivers, the Clean Air Act. Another important one would be the Noise Control Act and the Environmental Justice Act of 1994. Before any funds are committed to a project, you must ensure that your environmental review is completed and that you've received a release of funds. So The way our environmental compliance specialist describes it is once federal funds touch a project, the entire project becomes federal. So you can't commit private funds, you can't assign any agreements with anyone that would limit your ability to choose another site should you not be in compliance with the environmental review later. So option agreements are permissible, but anything outside of that, no contracts, no agreements should be signed until you receive your release of funds for the environmental review. Because it would result in a choice limiting action. And as I stated earlier, the choice and limiting action reduces your ability to choose a different project site should there be a problem with the site that you've chosen because of the environmental review. So one big thing, these are pre-contract costs, and so we would say that you should budget for your environmental review for the cost of a phase 1, phase 2, the potential use of a consultant, or the potential use of the need for an archaeologist or anything like that. The total cost is generally between $5,000 and $20,000. And for that, we'd say you should start early because typical times required to complete a review range from 30 to 120 days. For a lower level review, around 30 days, but for your environmental assessments, those will take about 120 days. And that you should also allow 25 to 35 days for periods of public comment. And if you have any questions about how to get started on your environmental review, I encourage you to reach out to Brett Hilberry or Crystal Andrews, and they'll be able to set you in the right direction. I do have something here that can tell you what type of environmental review your project will require. So if CDBG or any federal funding source is funding administration, studies and planning, those activities are exempt and don't require an environmental review. Your lower level environmental reviews would be for projects funded for tenant-based rental assistance, supportive services, operating costs, down payment assistance. That's when we would get the CENST. The CEST is for construction, which requires a higher process. We'll be looking at floodplain issues there. We'll be looking at noise abatement. We'll be looking at historic preservation and things like that. That review can take up to from 45 to 80 days. The highest level review would be your environmental assessment. And these are for projects like new construction, which we don't fund, but for acquisition and rehabilitation, we do fund those projects, and they do require this level of review. That process takes about 90 to 100 days. And so moving on from there.
I'm going to interject one more time.
Yeah.
Allison O'Kelly linked the corn chart from our DOLA website if folks need to or want to get that resource. It's in the chat feature now.
Thank you, Allison. So this is the final federal requirement that we'll be going over today, and it's the Uniform Relocation Act. The Uniform Relocation Act applies to any federally funded project involving acquisition or relocation. And its objective is to provide fair and equitable treatment for persons whose real property is required or people who are displaced in connection with federally funded projects. And it also encourages expedited acquisition by agreement without coercion. And so coercion just means that all acquisition for federally funded projects or for CDBG funded projects will be voluntary. Voluntary just means that there is no threat of use of eminent domain, and non-voluntary means that there is a potential threat of eminent domain. If your project meets any of this criteria, it means that the project is deemed voluntary. So no specific site or property needs to be acquired. The property to be acquired is not a part of an intended or planned designated project area. The agency will not acquire the project if negotiations fail. And the agency will inform the owner in writing of what it believes to be the fair market value. So here's a voluntary acquisition notice form that covers you. This must be submitted prior to the initiation of negotiations. So at application, if you know that you are going to be using federal funds or CDBG funds, then you want to be getting this voluntary acquisition notice signed. And it just states that you, the agency, will acquire the property. The owner agrees to sell this property for the agreed upon amount, and that you have offered them a fair purchase price according to the appraisal. So when you turn in the voluntary acquisition, we'll also be looking for the appraisal to compare your voluntary acquisition notice to. An appraisal is not necessary if the owner is donating the property or the property is less than $10,000. But if you don't provide an appraisal, we'll just need a summary from you stating that an appraisal is not necessary due to the former factors, the donation or that it's uncomplicated or less than $10,000. So now that we've covered the acquisition of the property, we have to look at the people who are affected by that acquisition. And these are the general relocation requirements. Temporary relocation is provided to eligible tenants in HUD-funded projects who are relocated for no longer than 12 months. But once they've been relocated longer than 12 months, then permanent displacement is triggered and full URA requirements are triggered. There's a really good webinar done by Teresa, one of our asset managers, and she really goes into detail on URA and what's provided or what's required. I'm just going to do a quick overview of it. The standards are temporarily relocated tenants must be reimbursed for their reasonable out-of-pocket expenses related to the temporary move. And that means increased housing cost and moving expenses. Voluntary participants don't require the need for temporary relocation. So single family owner occupied rehab programs don't need to follow URA requirements. But you want to get your relocation notices out as soon as possible. The relocation notices, or the GENs, explain that projects have been proposed, explains what project has been proposed and that the tenant will not be displaced. They caution the tenant not to move and explain the ramifications if they move on their own. URA regulations require that persons who are scheduled to be displaced must be provided with a GIN notice as soon as feasible. So as soon as you are applying for CDBG funds, or you know that you are, the GINs must go out to the residents. And this protects the agency of any unintended cost of relocation. So if a person moves before you get the GIN notices out, then that person is eligible for permanent relocation, which is much more expensive than temporary relocation. And here's an example of the GIN notice. So you know what to provide. All of these can be found in HUD 1378 URA handbook. And so that handbook will tell you the process for permanent and temporary relocation, and then it provides template forms to provide to the agencies, or to provide to for the agencies to provide to the tenants. So all GIN notices must be served by posting it in accessible locations and providing a copy to the tenant or the tenant's representative. Each notice shall be written in plain, understandable languages and in the tenant's first language. So making sure you understand the language preferences in the project that you're developing, and making sure that the GIN notice is provided to them in the language that they can understand. And if not, giving them a contact so that it can be explained to them properly. Each notice shall indicate if the project will result in a rent increase or require permanent or temporary relocation. So a tenant relocation plan, or a RERA, which is a relocation assistance plan, must be adopted and followed for all projects where URA applies. That tenant relocation plan must state that one-for-one replacement will be followed. And that the agency must have the following information in their tenant relocation plan. Their plan for communication, meetings for personal interviews to objectively assess the resident's specific needs, referrals to community organizations, temporary unit move-in and inspections for any temporary housing that will be provided. And it must schedule and budget to accommodate the occupants' project needs, to include safety measures from theft, injury, or constructions. It must claim and reimburse policies and and then there must be a plan for claims for reimbursement, and those reimbursements and claims must be timely and consistent. If there are any appeals to moving to the temporary unit that they're moving to the amount of reimbursement that they received, there must be an appeal process, and that appeal process must be explained, and assistance for that appeal must be provided. So with URA, there are record keeping requirements. The agency must keep record in detail sufficient enough to demonstrate compliance with applicable laws that are listed in HUD URA handbook, and all pertinent records shall be retained for the period specified, but no less than the latest of the following dates. the date by which all payments have been received, the date by which the project has been completed, or the date by which all issues resulting from litigation or audit have been resolved. So those are the cross-cutting requirements associated with the application process. And just a little review on how to submit all of that. Does anyone have any questions?
I'm looking at that right now. I want to give folks maybe 30 seconds or so just in case they need extra time to type out their questions, but I don't see any in the chat feature yet. And of course, folks can raise their hand if they want to speak out loud. All right. Seeing that there are no questions or comments, I do want to remind folks that they can always reach out to Ebony, as CDBG is her specialty. Ebony, if you want to type, I guess I could type your email address into the chat here. So folks can reach out to you. All right, just a reminder that this webinar is being recorded, so folks can always come back and revisit this. There's a lot of information, really great information related to CDBG and those cross-cutting requirements. Ebony, are there any last words you would like to say before we log off?
No, I think that if you have any questions about cross-cutting requirements, you can reach out to me and I can take you through it individually if you have any specific issues.
Great. All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for participating. Good information. Thank you, Ebony. That's from Adam Morgan. Thanks, Adam. All right, everyone. Well, have a great rest of your week. And again, reach out should you have any questions or concerns. Thanks, everyone.